Hello everyone, it's your good buddy Spider back again with another great episode, and I realize that I have let you down once more. I have made a mistake, one that will be corrected. I'm behind by a day. This was supposed to come out on Wednesday, it'll be out on Thursday. I apologize profusely. In all honesty, I let time get away from me. I forgot, honestly, what day it was because I base a lot of my time around other people's time, if you know what I mean. Whereas I base what I do a lot of times around other people's schedules, other people's days off, and various things going on. And if that changes, I'm not quite used to it. It takes me a minute to get back in the swing of things, and I thought it was a different day. I didn't really pay any attention. So, my bad. Let me have a little bit of a drink here, because my throat's being what it's doing. Also, I noticed something. I didn't realize this. I figured out apparently that this podcast has not been playing on Apple Podcasts. I don't know why. It seemed like maybe things got updated because I went in and I had to change a bunch of tax information and various things, and I had to look into something called the Digital Services Act or something that accounts for something in the European Union, which, if you're listening from there, I'm glad to have you, but I don't really care what your laws are, to be honest. But I had to go check off a bunch of boxes and do a bunch of stuff and resubmit everything, and it works now. I don't know why they take everything down. I guess maybe I missed a deadline or something. But if you haven't been able to listen on Apple Podcasts and you're listening now, welcome. Welcome back. Or for the first time if you're listening for the first time. It's been okay. It rained. It's been raining the last few days for the first time in a long time. It went a few weeks without raining. If you remember episodes earlier in the year, it was just storm after storm after storm, with tornadoes and all kinds of other things across the area. And we went through a dry spell where we didn't get any rain for most of August and most of September. And so now lately it's been raining a lot, as probably a last gasp before fall officially sets in. And so, yeah, it's been on one hand it's been cold, on another hand it's been, sometimes it's been warm. I've had to, I hadn't taken out the air conditioners yet. They're still in the windows. We have two, and we have a portable in my daughter's room. I'd taken hers out, and she's been kind of grouchy that I didn't put it back in. But, because it got really warm for a while. It got unseasonably warm, of course, here in Ohio for September. And then lately it's been cooling down again, and so the air conditioners are back off. So we'll see. I'm going to give it another couple of weeks before I decide to take them out of the windows for sure. Because that's the weather. That's how things do here in Ohio. That's how things do. I don't know what kind of a phrase that was, but I'm at least self-aware of when I say things that don't quite match up versus some other shows where words just spill out and they have no idea what they're talking about and they don't edit it afterwards. Hilarious. So there's that. Let's get into it. Also, the legal saga is basically finished. The legal saga from several episodes ago is finished. At least from where I am, because I don't have to do anything else from this point. Everything that goes on from here on out is all automatic behind the scenes things. It's out of my hands. So I won't really have to talk about it or comment on it unless something major happens, which I doubt it will. Or it will, but it won't have anything that I'll have to worry about. Okay, and I know I'm keeping things really vague. It's because I covered everything that had gone on when it happened. Right? And I've been told through channels that certain lawyers are still keeping an eye on me for whatever reason, which is kind of pointless. But because of that, I'm not feeding any more ammunition in certain directions that they can use to just bring up some BS things that either A, aren't true, or B, are things that needed to be said to try to use against me for anything. So anybody else who was interested in how that was going along, it's tying itself up nicely, to be honest. It's working out pretty well, to be perfectly honest, as I rub my hands together and do a little Mr. Burns excellent kind of impression. But on to the topic. I've been covering history over the last few episodes. I've been covering my personal history. I covered my childhood. I covered my music interests. The last episode, I covered my various romantic entanglements I've had throughout my life. And so this episode is going to be about my careers, my jobs, my things that I've done to get paid and to pay the rent and whatever throughout my life. It's not a long list, but it is an interesting list. I've done different things. And for the most part, I've had things that I've enjoyed about all of my jobs. For the most part. I mean, a lot of things happened to get me out of those jobs, unfortunately. And one of them was my fault. One of them was my fault. So I will say that. The rest of them were not. So, I've talked about how when I first graduated high school, I was kind of aimless and I didn't know what I was doing. And I spent the 2 weeks in Kentucky with my grandfather doing building things and working with materials and stuff. And part of the reason for that trip, as I might have mentioned at the time, was on the way back, we were going to swing up through where I was born. I was born in Athens, Ohio, which is a good deal farther south from here, and it was much farther than where I had lived currently in Pennsylvania. I hadn't moved out of my folks' house yet. So part of the trip was on the way back, we were going to swing through to the hospital where I was born and pick up the medical records, because you have to get birth certificates from the places where they were issued in Ohio. I don't know if that's the same everywhere, but that's where we had to go. So, and I needed that because I was going to try to find a job. I needed to have my birth certificate, and so I could drive, so I could get my license, and all the various things that you need to have identification for before you get an actual ID card. All the things you need for the ID card, whether it's a state ID or a driver's license or whatever. And I ended up getting a state ID rather than a driver's license, because at the time, it was a hassle to figure out to get a vehicle and to find time to practice how to drive and that kind of stuff. So, but I got the birth certificate, got the ID, And my first job was as a dishwasher. And it was at a restaurant that my sister, my older sister, it was her first job. She had been a server. I mean, you could say waitress or whatever. I don't know what the correct verbiage is these days. But, so we already kind of had an in. They were like, oh, we knew your sister, so we'll give you a shot. So I started as a dishwasher, which, I didn't particularly like, but it was a job. And I like to think I was good at it because I wanted to make sure that things were clean. Now, in this restaurant, you had management, you had servers, you had cooks, and you had dishwashers. You didn't have a janitor. You didn't have dedicated people to go out and bus tables, which is to go out and get all the plates and the used silverware and stuff and to clean it for the next people. The servers were supposed to take care of that. And even occasionally, the dishwasher and the cook had to be interchangeable. But when I got in, it was just dishwasher. But because I was the lowest person on the totem pole, I also would have to clean bathrooms and do certain things that were kind of like, whatever. Didn't like any of that, especially because sometimes, oh my gosh, we had some really bad bathroom situations. And there were a couple times where I would go in and I'd see the state of the bathroom and I'd be like, I do not get paid for this. No. And I would tell management, no, that's it. That's a you job. That's something for you to do. And if you don't want to hire a janitor, then you take care of whatever that is in the bathroom. Oh boy. We had a big dishwashing machine, so I didn't really have to do things by hand, although frequently I discovered quickly that some foods don't do well in dishwashers. I mean, for people who wash dishes at home with a regular home dishwasher, you have to wash the dishes before you wash the dishes, right? You know what I mean. You have to rinse things off, you have to frequently wipe things down, and various things of that nature. And if you have a super high-powered dishwasher, I always wondered, well, why? What's the point? Why not just wash them all by hand anyway? And the dishwashing machine is more like it's more of a sanitizing process than it is to actually wash the dishes. So you have to wash them off, and then you put them in there, and it sanitizes. Right? I found out that some foods, if any molecule of said foods were left, you had a disaster on your hands. And one of those foods was cottage cheese. If cottage cheese ended up in the dishwasher, any bit of it, a single curd, it would just turn into thousands of tiny molecules of cottage cheese that would come out the other side and be coating the rest of the otherwise clean dishes. And that was problematic. Same thing with mashed potatoes, at least restaurant mashed potatoes. And so I didn't care for that too much, but, I made the best of it. I made friends and acquaintances with the various other workers, which is that to say the cooks or some of the management team. Occasionally I would have to cook, and I have to say, while I don't think I often got any complaints about my cooking as far as taste goes, they didn't always look quite right. We did a process for omelets where you would put them on the griddle, and then you would splash a little bit of water and then put a lid on them to puff them up. And sometimes mine would just be grotesquely large looking. And pancakes, I could never get the same size of pancakes twice. They were either too small or too large or this or that. They were never exactly the way they should have been. I just couldn't get the right proportions on the pancakes. But beyond that, I got to know one of the assistant managers, and he and I would talk about different things. We would talk about pro wrestling. We would talk about comic books sometimes. We would talk about games, that kind of stuff. And another guy who got hired in as a cook while I was there. This was the guy who, unfortunately, in my relationships episode, I said he was with the girl next door, and then I got with the girl next door, and then he moved out, and then she left. You know, big whole dramatic thing. Right. Initially, we got along, and he was looking to find a place locally. Because he was going to school locally for something, one of the local colleges, but he was going to transfer to another college later in life, which believe he eventually did. He went to somewhere in Pennsylvania after the incident. And the assistant manager guy, he was living in a studio apartment above a grocery store, and he was looking to get out of that. And so another manager who also worked there said, hey, you know what? We live in a duplex where it's split half down the middle. There's one house on one side, there's one on the other side, basically. And the people next door are moving out. So why don't I put in a good word to my landlord, and you guys can talk to him, and you guys can go in on it and save some money. And for me, being at home, having frustrations, butting heads with my parents and things for being home and getting this job and not being able to drive, having to rely on them to drive me back and forth to work, it sounded like a pretty good idea. So we split the rent 3 ways, we split the utilities 3 ways, and we moved into this place. Which is kind of besides the point of the job thing. But I lived there for several jobs, which is why I mentioned it, because it was kind of important. I don't remember how long I was dishwashing for. I think it was for a while. I was there for a while, and I had mounting frustrations because they would cut hours and they would do different things, and because the franchise was always struggling with something, and looking for ways to cut costs. And we got other managers that came in that sucked. So we had an incident. This is the only job I've ever been fired from. And I'm not proud of this. I'm not proud. I said something I shouldn't have said. This was during the tail end of my angry years, when I was just angry at the world and I was angry at everything, and I would lash out at people. It was partially deserved but partially not, but I did deserve to get fired. I said something I shouldn't have. The servers were supposed to, because we didn't have people to go out and clean tables, they were supposed to come back when they brought a bunch of plates or a bunch of dishes, and they were supposed to scrape them all off of the worst of what was on them before they left them there. So the dishwasher had a little bit less to do. I still had to do the actual rinsing and scrubbing and then put them in the machine. But it saved me some time, because if there's a rush, you got to get everything through as quick as you can, right? So this one server, she comes through and she dumps a bunch of stuff. Doesn't do anything with them, just dumps them. And they're covered with food and napkins and whatever. And so I said, without intending to be a snarky jerk about it, but I said, hey, make sure when you come back that you scrape those off. And so she starts yelling. She's mad. She's like, I've got customers, and I've got this, and I've got this to do. I'm not going to worry about doing your job, and blah, blah, blah. And I must have been having one of those days, and I'm not going to blame it on something like that. I'm not going to say, again, I take responsibility for this. I must have been just on the edge, because I instantly went out. She had gone out to the floor of the restaurant, so she was out there where there were customers and things like that, and I went right out there, and I said, if you yell at me again, I'm going to knock your teeth out. Which is not at all the appropriate thing to say in any situation over such a trivial little thing, right? So she gets furious. She hauls me back to the office. She said, you hear... He just told me, he just threatened me, he just blah, 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 blah. And I had to talk to management about it. I admitted, I said, yeah, I said that. She pissed me off. I feel bad, but I said it. And a day or so later, they called me into the office on my next work shift and was like, hey, you know what, we got to let you go. You can't say that kind of stuff, especially in front of customers. It's a threat, it's this, it's that. And I was like, all right, I get it. I'm not mad. I'm going to be upset, but it's my own fault. I get it. So I went home. I was without a job for 3 months. And I didn't feel good about that. I was looking for places, I was applying for places, but I didn't have much experience. I had a high school degree, a high school diploma, and not much else. I'd only washed dishes. So my dad ended up helping me pay my rent and bills for 3 months. And I was eating ramen noodles almost exclusively. And canned food from a local dollar-type store that was really cheap. There was maybe like 50 cents a can or something of raviolis and stuff like that. And that's one of the reasons why, to this day, I don't like ramen noodles. I burnt out completely on them. I had them every which way I possibly could, and I can't stand them no more. I just can't. Ugh, don't like them. So, after that, I got a tip that it was from family, because most of my family have all worked in the medical field. Of course, my dad worked in the medical field. I have several aunts. My mom was in it, and so one of my aunts said, hey, we've got positions in the kitchen, and since you just were at the restaurant, you can do that, and you don't have to tell them why you were fired. Just, say that, yes, I was fired. So I applied for that, and they gave me the job mostly because of my dad. Not because he pulled any strings, because he didn't, but because he's still a well-respected person there. I mean, he was one of the top people there, and they've always respected his opinion, even though they've off and on treated him badly there. So I got the job working in the kitchen, which was a variety of things. It was washing dishes. It was serving up customer plates, not customer plates, but patient plates for the patient rooms. I didn't often cook the food for that. I wasn't a cook person there, but I did have to put things on the plates and follow the directions of the dietitians. And you had to make sure you gave people who were diabetic had to have certain amounts of certain foods, and people who were on a liquid diet had to have certain kinds of that. So it was a little bit more to it than just putting food on a tray and taking it up. And you had to occasionally talk to the patient if they were there, and you had to be nice, and so you had to have some semblance of people skills. You also had to work the cafeteria line for the hospital employees. They would come down and they would get lunch and dinner. I think sometimes there was a breakfast. There wasn't often. A lot of times breakfast was you would just put out danishes or you would put out something and they would just self-serve and whatnot. But occasionally, some days you'd do eggs and you'd do bacon and sausage and whatnot. So... So I had to learn how to use the cash register and that kind of thing. I was okay at that job. I wasn't bad. And we got a new... Well, this was before then. This was before. There was an incident at one point where I was supposed to mop the floor of the kitchen. And I did. I went around but I didn't sweep it good enough. So when I mopped, there was something I'd missed. And so the manager was like, "Hey, I thought I told you to do this." And I said, "I did do this." And she was like, "Yeah, but you didn't." And I was like, "But I did do this because of this and this." And she decided that I was lying to her, which I wasn't. I legitimately thought, hey, I thought I did a pretty good job. I must have just missed something. But she, because, again, of my dad's position, decided to give me special treatment. And I don't mean that in like both... I think she thought she was doing me a favor, but it was not helpful. I was a person who needed to be told, like, this is right, this is wrong, this is not, like, right and wrong, like, that's evil and that's good, but I mean, I needed to have authority be like, hey, you can't do this, because I had problems with authority. I was a bit of a jerk, right? Especially after I was grouchy about what happened at the last job. So, the hospital president calls me up into his office and talks to me about the incident, which is a bit much. Why is he talking to the guy who works in the kitchen? And it was because of my dad, because they, for whatever reason, they thought that they could put some kind of influence over me by doing me this favor and things like that. And they didn't want me to tell my dad about it, which was kind of... It was kind of grimy, to be honest. And I'd heard sometimes stories that my dad and my mom would say about the administration, and I didn't think much of it. I didn't, that's just things that happened. But it soured me. Like, I was furious. Because I shouldn't, none of that should have applied to me. If they had an issue, they should have just given me my write-up and said, make sure you're careful again, and I probably would have made sure I was careful again. But this time, it put me on edge. I was like, they're going to treat me this way? Because of my dad? Because when a normal person would have got a write-up, that's not fair. Why are they... Whatever. So I got mad. But a job opened up in the housekeeping division, specifically to clean floors. And I don't mean just to mop. I mean to also run big industrial floor scrubbers, to do carpeting in the winter, to do stripping and waxing of the floors in certain areas. So I asked for a transfer down there, and it got granted, and I ended up doing that, and I felt pretty good about it. And then the boss down there ended up getting... I don't know if he got fired or if he quit. I think he left to go back to a different job, and so they had to hire somebody else. Who was in my corner. She was in my corner, and she did her best to be like, to give me the resources I needed. But that specter of the administration being weird with me about my dad was always there. So while I really liked that job, because it was a job that was mostly solo, it doesn't require multiple people. You would do what you needed to do, and you would wait for the floors to dry. You couldn't leave certain areas if you were on a project because you didn't want anybody to walk through it. right? If you put signs down, people are going to walk right past the signs. So you had to sit there and babysit things. But eventually, the administration started cracking down and saying things were problematic, this and this. And it was because we were spread really thin. Some of the things weren't getting done because there weren't enough people to do them, and we were getting yelled at for it. And I felt specifically targeted because of how they were towards my dad, because there was politics going on. He had been there before the hospital got corporatized, because everything's corporate now. Healthcare is all corporations now, and he had been there before a corporation had come in and bought all the hospitals in the area to run them as businesses rather than healthcare, which is modern nowadays. Now every place in the entire United States, that's how it is. You don't have local hospitals that are there for your benefit. They're there to make money, to be perfectly honest. And so they had kind of a grudge against him because he wouldn't go along with certain policies, because he felt that I need to take care of the patients, I need to take care of the people. That's what's important. And he didn't mind occasionally losing money to help somebody feel better, right? So they were always kind of at odds with him about that, and that ended up being retaliation to me because they thought it would get to him. So I quit. I quit that job. I ended up, because that was on principle. That was one of a few jobs that I've quit on principle. I ended up talking to the people who run security at the hospital, who did at the time, who ran security. I said, "Do you have any openings? Maybe I could transfer to that." And they said, "Well, not here at the hospital." And our company would see it as a conflict of interest since you already worked here. But at one of our other locations in town, sure, there's a spot. So I transferred to become a security guard. I went to Parma, Ohio, and did a bunch of tests and signed a bunch of paperwork and stuff. Got uniforms. And one of my main duty, I was placed at a factory that created pillars. I don't know if they were fiberglass or what they were. They were extruded pillars that you would put for porches and buildings and things, right? Roman pillars or just house pillars or whatever. And you wouldn't think there's a huge business for that, but because so few places made those, they sold to a lot of places across the state, across the country. So, but their main reason for me being there was less for security and more to walk through the various warehouses and make sure nothing was on fire. Because they had a lot of dry, aged wood in different places from the process that they used in pallets and various materials. So my job was to walk through and patrol these areas mostly to make sure that nothing caught fire. And I was there for a little while. And then apparently the company, the factory, decided to switch contracts. They didn't want to use the same security company anymore. They wanted to use a different one. So we got outbid. So my company wanted to send me to a different town that was like an hour away or something like that. It was ridiculous. It was a horrible distance, and my car didn't run I was driving by that point, but my car didn't run very well. So I couldn't really get there. But so I said, well, I can't really do that. That's not feasible for me, so I guess I'm just out of a job. So I quit that one. And that's when I got the tip about working retail, which is what the bulk of my overall jobs in life have been from that point on. I was retail for quite a long time. But that's when I went to Sears and Roebuck. Sears and Roebuck. And I worked at a Sears store in a mall that I'd seen the mall get built. It was Ashtabula Mall in Ashtabula, Ohio, and they had a Sears store on one end and a Kmart on the other, which is weird considering that at some point they both got owned by the same company, the same person. But I was hired in to do lawn and garden. And so I sold tractors, and I sold mowers, and I sold tools because it was also hardware. It was hardware, lawn and garden, one main department that covered everything because it was a small store. You didn't have separate people for separate areas. And I did okay there. I learned a lot because I admittedly did not know a lot about tools and about lawn and garden stuff. I didn't know, and I made some mistakes. One of the things that I did learn how to use was the paint machine to mix paint colors. I got really good at that. I got really excellent at that. And I felt pretty good about that because I had people who would come in specifically just to see me to get paint. They wouldn't talk to anybody else. And they were very upset when I left. But I was there and my sales were starting to slip. Either because I didn't know a whole lot about the stuff and I was trying my best, but I sometimes just couldn't get it right and I would lose out on sales. Plus it was getting slow. And because I was the low guy on the totem pole, they said, well, we don't want to fire you because we know you're trying and you occasionally can do some really good stuff. We're going to transfer you to electronics. And I didn't want to go to electronics. I felt it was like a punishment. And the whole point was because electronics were higher value for smaller things. So they thought, oh, if you can sell fewer things but sell them well, then you'll make the same money or more and we'll still make money. And I didn't know a whole lot about electronics at the time either. I knew some things about computers, but I didn't know about TV resolutions. Flat screens were new. So all this LCD plasma stuff was all new to me. I had no idea. I'd never thought about it before. It was around the time that they were taking tuners out of the VCRs. You couldn't find VCRs hardly any place anymore because it was all moving to DVDs. And so I did not do very well in electronics there. Admittedly, I did not. I was really struggling. And it was around that time. I might have met her actually before that. I might have met her when I was working security, but I had met the girl who I had thought at the time was going to be like, this is the one, this is the girl for me. And she worked at a Sears store in Akron, Ohio, which is where she was going to school. And it was around that time we had the discussions because I was playing with the band on weekends and things, and she was like, I'm going to be in school for a lengthy period of time up here, but I don't know if we're going to be able to keep this going such long distance. And I said, well, okay, I'll just go move out there. I'll move out there. I'll be closer to you, and we'll get this working. And I transferred from my Sears store to that Sears store. And I told them at the time I would prefer to be lawn and garden, but they said, well, if you're in electronics now, we have to put you in electronics when you get here. So I said, okay. Transferred out there. And relationship stuff aside, I ended up starting to be really good at things at the new store, and part of it was because it was a larger store. They had a bigger customer base. They did more money in general, and the opportunity to make more money was there. And I learned a lot more, and I got pretty darn good at selling electronics. It took a little while, but I ended up being, and I don't want to say this in a big egotistical kind of way, but I ended up being one of the best electronic salespeople that they had, and I got promoted to full-time, which was awesome. Some point along all that, I had the breakup, and then I met the woman who would become my wife. And she moved into the apartment, so it would get easier. It was easier to spread around the finances a bit. And it got to the point, actually, where they were going to close the store. It wasn't public yet, and they were denying it to the employees if we asked. But I had seen the evidence. I had seen, I'd found the closing manual in the computer system for training. All the signs were there. And so I was getting frustrated. I was getting more and more frustrated. I was having arguments with customers over coupons on the floor. I was getting angry again. My mood was taken over, and so they got me into the office and they're like, "Hey, what's the problem? What's going on here? What can we do?" And I admitted, I was like, I don't like being a salesperson. I've never liked being a salesperson because I'm not a people person. I don't like sales, but I just happen to be good at it. Can I transfer to a different part of the store? Can I move to the back? Can I work on the dock and just work with stock? And they said, well, we do have an opening for what they called the PMT room. I'm sure the M was for maintenance, but I don't know what the rest of it was for. And what you did there was if a customer brought in like a lawnmower or something that was giving them trouble, but it didn't need to be sent out for warranty replacement or anything like that, if you could do a simple repair, then they would do it on site if it was covered under warranty. And then you would rebuild the hand tools, because we had the Craftsman hand tools and they had a lifetime warranty, so you would repair or replace those kind of things. You would build the gas grills when summer came along. You'd put together the patio furniture for displays. You would build the holiday displays, all kinds of things. And they said, we need somebody for back there. So I said, all right. Because there was one guy back there and he couldn't do all of it himself. He needed days off. So I went there and I learned how to do that, and I liked that. Then they also needed extra hands unloading trucks and things, and as much as that wasn't really supposed to be my job, I helped because we were all a team. And then, of course, my daughter was born. And so that put some things in motion, because I knew I couldn't... We looked into different things, because we were both working at the time. My wife had moved she had left Sears, and she was working in a furniture store. And it was a better job than mine. My job didn't pay nearly as much as hers, with the benefits and all kinds of other things. So we talked it over, and we said, well, you know what? When it's time for you to go back to work, somebody has to watch our daughter. Daycare, which we didn't really want to do anyway, but daycare, the prices at the time, and I'm sure they've gone up, were $200 a week for a stranger to watch your child and to basically raise her for part of the time. And I didn't want to do that. I figured if anybody was going to raise the child, it was going to be us. We're her parents. It's our responsibility. So we decided that I would stay home until she was old enough to go to school or to do whatever, and then I would go back to work. And my wife would work her regular job in the meantime, because it was better than mine. It had better insurance and things of that nature. And also around that time, because things were getting closer to the store closing, and they still hadn't admitted it. They didn't admit it till after I was gone. But they started cutting staff by a lot. They cut 90% of the management team in one day. Just fired them all. They lowered the hours of almost everybody else. And they started talking to me about not being able to get my work done because I had to help with the truck and loading stuff when there was hardly anybody there, and I couldn't get the tools rebuilt fast enough because I couldn't divide my time. I was one person. And the other guy who worked back there had a stroke and had to take extended time off. So it left me just doing that. I ended up having to do like 4 or 5 different jobs. And so they were upset with me for that. And they were really just trying to get me to quit because I was full-time. And they didn't want any full-timers when the store closed. They didn't want to have to give anybody any severance. If you were part-time, they didn't have to give you severance. But it was on a day like that, when I was only scheduled by myself, and the delivery truck came through, and you have to get started on it. You can't just wait till the next person comes in to help. You got to get started because the guy's on a schedule. That was when I hurt my back. And so that made the decision even easier. It's like, well, you can't risk doing that. You got to stay home. So I stayed home, and my wife worked. And that was the last real job, I suppose you could say, that I've had. That's the last time I worked outside of my house. I've done a little couple of odd jobs here and there, like me and Rob from This Uncanny Earth. He was doing carpets for people for a little while. We did a carpet for somebody that he knew, who was a great guy, and he's passed on now, unfortunately. He was an older guy. But, so I would do that and get paid on the side and things, but I didn't have anything else going on until I got into radio, which I didn't really see as a job, really. I mean, it became a regular thing, and it was floated to me as a job. One of the many things that were untrue from this person. And I know if there's the lawyers listening, they're going to jump all over it and they're going to say I'm slander and whatnot, but it's true events. These are true things that happened. I was always told that I was going to get paid eventually, and that I was a business partner, and that I was owed all these different things. And anytime I came up with ideas to try to increase the source of capital and try to get us more money, it was either shot down or it was screwed up or something of that nature. So while I consider that, I wouldn't call that a job in the traditional sense, because it didn't seem like a job until much later towards the end, and by that point it was looking like it was a trap more than anything else. But it taught me skills. It taught me skills that I needed to do what I'm doing right now. It taught me how to use this exact software. The software that I'm using right here, the Spreaker software platform, is what we used for the radio then. And it was through this that This Uncanny Earth was born. And that continued. That continues to this day, even though that show does not use the same software anymore. We're strictly on mostly YouTube and video stuff now. But it did teach me a lot. So out of all of the awful things that I've had to experience in dealing with certain individuals, not talking about Rob, of course, but talking about the other people who claimed I was their business partner and this and that and all kinds of other stuff that they fed me, I did learn a lot about the technology. I learned a lot about the business, which is funny because my learning about the business far outstripped their understanding of the business. And it was valuable. It was valuable skills. It was very valuable skills. And so that has led to the penultimate position of what I consider my job, which is Uncanny Media, which encompasses this podcast. It encompasses This Uncanny Earth. It encompasses my promotional duties which I do on behalf of Musicians Hangout and Lou Jack Promotions. If you haven't heard, I don't know if I mentioned this. I think this happened after my previous episode. We are now partnered with Lou Jack Promotions out of Tacoma, Washington, the same neck of the woods where the Musicians Hangout is located. They know Kevin from Lou Jack. He's the guy who owns that business, and we've got some mutual friends and things, and he's become part of the network, part of the Uncanny Media family, which is fantastic. And so I've got all that. I've got, of course, the YouTube gig doing the gaming videos. I've got the reviews, all the various things that's going on. And while I'm not getting a paycheck at the moment, I am at the very start of beginning to earn ad revenue and things of that nature here and there. I wouldn't call any of it really revenue just yet, because it's not quite enough to cover the expenses that I put into everything. But it's on its way. And so I consider this enough of a job to be, this is my job now. Radio person, promoter, CEO of Uncanny. And technically, I'm the chief operating officer of Big Buff Records. And while we're dealing with some various changeover stuff, and we're kind of in a low period right now, that is an area where I do intend to make a profit at some point in the near future, and so you could call that a job as well. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to write books. I had so many ideas. I still have ideas in my head of stories and things. I make up fan fiction in my head of all kinds of things all the time. And then later on, I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to make money doing music, which is, a lot harder than it seems. If you're not cranking out top 40 hits, then you're struggling. But I get royalties from that stuff. I do get royalties from that area. So I am making a little bit of money off of that. And someday, all of the various pieces of the Uncanny Machine are all going to work in sync. Everything is going to come together. And we're going to start getting paid. That is the hope, that is the plan, and everything is, I'm confident, because it's moving very easily in that direction now. That I know what to do, and now that I know how to handle certain bits of business, and who to work with and who not to work with. So, and that's going pretty good. So that's going to be probably the end of my employment history. The plan had always been to go back to work and find another job once my daughter was old enough, but then we decided to homeschool her, which means somebody had to stay home, and there's not a lot going on for work from home jobs, believe me. I've looked, and again, we didn't want to trust other people to raise her. We don't live near any family. We don't have any family nearby that can watch her, that can babysit her, that can do that kind of thing. So one of us has to be here for her until she's old enough to take care of herself. And so that's just how things have happened. And I've got my fingers in so many different businesses. I've got in the promotional stuff. I've got it in the music stuff. I've got it in the podcast stuff. I've got a lot of stuff. A lot of different plates are all spinning at the moment. And at some point, all of that is going to come together. and I'm excited for it. I'm looking forward to the future. It's tempting to just throw it all out because I'm not getting any younger. I'm in my 40s. How much longer do I have to get this going? But I will get there. All the building blocks are there. I've got a team that I'm growing that's building around me. And by the time I get old enough where I can retire, I will be able to. I will be able to use this as retirement. It'll be passive income. It'll roll in. And it's all going to work out. It's all going to work out, and that's the plan. So that is everything that I have done professionally with my life since graduating high school. So what do you think? Anybody have any thoughts about that? What kind of jobs have you had? When this event, I mean, you can actually comment on this on Spotify, and I think you can comment on Spreaker as well. I didn't really think about it, but you can comment on both of those areas. When it eventually hits YouTube, you can comment there, but I'm so far behind on YouTube, I know. I'm like 12 episodes behind. Maybe. Longer. More. I'm more than that, I think. Goodness, the last episode I put on YouTube was 15, which was the Jack and V episode, the interview. But I'm going to try to fix that very soon. I know I've said that for a few shows now, but I am going to try to fix that. You deserve it. I need to try to make a concerted effort to get caught up. Spinning plates. It's those spinning plates, right? And yeah, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic. I'm looking forward to everything working out. For not just me, for everybody. For the entire team. Because we deserve it. We all deserve it. And we're not getting any younger. Nobody's getting any younger. So yeah, comment if you like. Tell me what kind of jobs you've had. If you think my set of careers is atypical in any way. I don't think it's anything real fantastic, but it is what it is. Me being the owner of a company is certainly something new. It's a new experience for me, and I think I'm doing pretty well at the moment, to be honest. I haven't royally screwed it all up yet, so, and I believe I've made more friends than enemies, as far as things go. I only consider one person my enemy anyway. You guys all know the story behind that, so, because they totally deserve it. Other than that, I think we're done. I think we've hit our limit. Next week's episode, I already have it picked out. I don't usually have it picked out this far in advance. But this is going to be a fun one. This is going to be movies. I'm going to talk about good movies versus bad movies. Bad movies that we like, bad movies that we don't like, good movies that were good, and good movies that could be better, and movie franchises that used to be good that I've fallen out of and aren't as good for various reasons. So it's movies. Plus a few bits of bonus info that I neglected to mention from some past episodes. I got to explain some things that I didn't explain, and I realized I didn't explain them long after the episode was over, so we got to take care of some of that, and we're going to do that when that happens, so that's next week. But this was this week. It's a day behind, but it's here. Appreciate you tuning in. Don't forget that the show is usually every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. 8 p.m. or 8 a.m. Pacific, And you can listen to it wherever you hear your favorite podcasts. And on Apple. Now, again, for some reason it wasn't, but now it is. We're all caught up. So, that's it. See you next time. Have a good one.